We are now past the 40-day mark, and Americans nationwide have flooded authorities with upwards of 40,000 leads. Despite this, Nancy Guthrie remains unaccounted for following her abduction under the cover of darkness on February 1st, 2026. Right from her peaceful Tucson residence in the Catalina foothills, her loved ones continue to battle relentlessly. Federal agents are still grinding away at the investigation. We are revisiting that property today, looking closely at the specific evidence detectives discovered indoors, along with the clues abandoned at the scene, which together illustrate a much darker reality than the general public tracking this mystery has truly grasped. Passing the 40-day milestone with 0 arrests, 0 identified suspects, and 0 evidence that she is alive makes it perfectly fair to ask the tough questions. What is the true status of this manhunt right now? Forget the polished media briefings and the comforting talking points. We need the genuine truth constructed from official documents and the exact words of the detectives actively involved. Sheriff Chris Nanos from the Pima County Sheriff's Department has consistently projected a cautiously hopeful image to the general public. Speaking to journalists at the beginning of March, he insisted that his team was absolutely much further along than they were on day 1. He claimed they had gathered a massive amount of intelligence, that they were actively chasing down fresh tips, and that they uncovered plenty of details being kept strictly under wraps. Federal authorities backed up that narrative. One former federal agent closely monitoring the situation told Newsweek it was a highly active investigation, featuring as many as 100 federal agents, intelligence analysts, and local Pima County deputies exhausting every viable lead. That specific description matters deeply because calling the investigation highly active isn't simply a matter of providing false hope. She means the trail hasn't frozen over yet. It still holds momentum, and that momentum could legitimately break things wide open. Meanwhile, the bounty for information has skyrocketed. Nancy's relatives pledged $1 million out of their own pockets, though those funds will solely be paid out if she is brought back safely. Federal investigators are currently offering $100,000, twice the amount they originally put on the table. Extra cash from independent supporters has bumped the grand total way past $1,200,000. The main hotlines at 1-800-CALL-FBI and 520-35149 are currently operational and manned 24/7. Federal authorities even shifted dedicated video tech teams straight to Phoenix just to handle the sheer mountain of security tapes they have to sift through. A specialized federal task force was formed, pulling 4 Pima County detectives and 1 sergeant entirely off their regular duties to operate out of the Tucson Federal Building strictly for this manhunt. However, getting a complete grip on the current situation means looking at the hidden details missing from those official media statements. Sheriff Nanos and his entire Pima County Department are currently facing a massive $1.3 million civil complaint. Former tactical unit leader Lieutenant Bob Kreider openly stated that 98% of the sheriff's own force previously hit him with a vote of no confidence. A union group speaking for the Pima County officers even went on record calling the whole operation an ego-driven disaster. Nanos naturally rejected that label completely. It turns out the feds and local law enforcement haven't been playing together nearly as nicely as the early PR spun it, and the judgment calls happening in those crucial first hours. Moves that the sheriff openly admitted he regrets and would change with hindsight, sparked massive hurdles that detectives are still trying to overcome today. The probe is definitely moving forward. The genetic testing continues. The tips are legitimate. Yet the journey from day 1 to the present moment is paved with questionable choices that left crime scene specialists, veteran federal agents, and everyday citizens wondering the exact same thing. Did authorities actually manage this crisis correctly from the jump? To really grasp the story told by the evidence, you need to know exactly who Nancy Guthrie was and picture her normal daily routine inside those walls. She was 84 years old and called that exact same Catalina foothills property her home for over half a century. It was the place where she brought up her 3 kids, Annie, Cameron, and Savannah. That area was your typical peaceful, cactus-lined desert enclave nestled under the Santa Catalina Mountains, a spot where neighbors knew everyone's schedule and violent offenses were basically unheard of. Nancy suffered from major physical restrictions. In fact, Sheriff Nanos noted publicly that she couldn't make it 50 yards completely unassisted, and she relied on an implant to keep her heart beating right. She also depended on daily cardiac prescriptions. Drugs, her loved ones insisted, were absolutely critical to keeping her alive. We aren't talking about something you can skip for a weekend. Missing those doses would trigger severe health failures within 24 hours. Savannah Guthrie made that brutally clear to the public. She stated her mom lived in perpetual agony and fundamentally required those pills to stay breathing. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy hung out at Annie's place about 4.5 miles down the road, enjoying supper and a few rounds of cards with her relatives. Her son-in-law, Tomaso Chioni, gave her a ride back. Security video from the house verified the garage bay opening around 9:48 p.m. and shutting at 9:50 p.m. He made sure she got inside, waited for the door to shut, and then took off. That exact moment was the final time any relative laid eyes on Nancy Guthrie before she vanished into thin air. The next day, a buddy was waiting on Nancy to watch their regular Sunday service stream together. Nancy never flaked on that tradition. When she didn't show up, people started calling, but nobody picked up. Relatives rushed over to check on her, pulling into the driveway right around 11 a.m. They scoured the entire house and yard but couldn't find a trace of her. By 12 o'clock, they dialed 911. Officers pulled up at 12:15 p.m. The scene waiting for them indoors offered the earliest, most chilling clues about the nightmare that had unfolded. Nancy's cell was sitting right there on the kitchen island. Her pocketbook hadn't been rummaged through, and her crucial heart meds, the exact drugs an elderly patient with an implant absolutely needed to survive, were sitting exactly where she stored them. Furthermore, the security camera, usually mounted by the entryway, was missing, not smashed or taped over, but completely ripped away. Then, as the responding officers stepped closer to the main entrance, they stumbled upon the discovery that turned this investigation upside down. The moment Pima County officers initially walked that location for evidence on February 1st, 2026, they stepped onto a property that was already broadcasting its darkest secrets through stains of dried blood, right across the front steps, trailing from the entryway straight down to the pavement. DNA analysis eventually proved that those perfectly round, isolated drops of blood found at the scene belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Yet the local sheriff's office unsealed the location way too early, long before the FBI got the chance to roll in and do a proper, deep-dive forensic search. Once barricades fell, local journalists, like an Arizona's Family News crew, strolled right up to the entryway and filmed exactly what Sheriff Nanos later admitted was human blood spatter. Media outlets basically got first dibs on the most crucial physical clues tied to an 84-year-old woman's vanishing, beating federal agents to the punch. Questioned about whether he regretted that call, Nanos openly admitted his misstep. Hindsight is 20/20, for sure. I definitely should have waited longer before doing that. One veteran Mesa cop criticized both the premature unsealing of the house and the excessive media chatting as the absolute worst blunders of the initial investigation. Former NYPD investigator Michael Alcazar, who now teaches at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, agreed that local cops definitely messed up by letting people into the area way too soon. Despite standing by his team's overall diligence, Nanos publicly owned up to the error. Since then, experts have relentlessly scrutinized those front step blood traces, providing the most detailed public forensic breakdown of the entire investigation. 3 distinct professionals boasting backgrounds in federal casework, behavioral profiling, and medical pathology reviewed the spatter patterns and shared their findings with the public. Every single one locked onto unique details pointing to the exact same horrifying scenario. Former federal agent Maureen O'Connell broke down the spatter evidence during a March broadcast of the Brian Enton Investigates show. Her takeaway was clear. The missing evidence inside those red drops proved Nancy didn't just stroll out the front door. The round droplets remained completely undisturbed, with 0 shoe marks breaking the trail. Walking through fresh spatter naturally leaves blank spots, smudges, altered spacing, or shoe prints disrupting the natural splatter. But investigators found literally nothing like that on the porch. O'Connell figured the attackers bundled the victim up in something before hauling her away. Perfectly spherical splatters meant the fluid dripped vertically from a stationary source, not someone moving around. Then she took it a step further. Looking at how the drops formed, she guessed two individuals lugged her out, with the victim's head angled so that the bleeding came directly from her facial region. Medical examiner Dr. Michael Barton shared his own interpretation while chatting with Fox News Digital. He noticed those distinctive donut-like rings with lighter middles, which usually happens when the red fluid mixes with oxygen as it plummets to the ground. This reaction strongly points to facial trauma, like airway bleeding. Barton's final verdict left zero room for doubt. Looking at the amount, design, and layout on the steps, these weren't just accidental scrapes. He straight up declared they were textbook signs of a violent kidnapping. He additionally pointed out that the fluid layout meant the victim couldn't or didn't even try to stanch the flow, backing up the idea that she was completely knocked out or paralyzed while being dragged over that entryway. Former federal behavior analyst Jim Clemente featured on that exact same Brianna broadcast, offering a contrasting but equally crucial perspective on the evidence. While he agreed the vertical drips pointed to a sluggish pace, he completely rejected the theory that the perpetrators had completely bundled her up. He argued that if she were swaddled while still dripping onto the pavement, they did a sloppy job covering her. Instead, he saw those stains as proof of fierce resistance rather than someone just being passed out. He believed she brawled with her attackers indoors, sustaining serious wounds, and those porch splatters dropped as they eventually forced her outside the residence. Clemente felt the trails proved she survived the initial struggle, ruling out a fatal blow or a deadweight drag. The scene screamed of a forced march, showing she was abducted. She was definitely bleeding but still breathing during that terrifying exit. Different experts, different angles. Yet all roads lead back to the exact same chilling starting point. The true nightmare unfolded completely indoors, hidden in the pitch black, within a 41-minute window between 1:47 a.m., when the porch cam cut out, and 2:28 a.m., when her heart monitor dropped its mobile connection. The intruder didn't just unplug that security device. They literally ripped it off the siding and stole it. The suspect, caught on tape at 1:47 a.m., was rocking a solid black balaclava covering their entire face. Dark handwear, pale trousers, a deep-toned coat, and a 25-liter black Ozark Trail backpack. A gun sat holstered dead center on his chest rather than his waist or spine, perfectly placed for a lightning-fast quick draw. He clenched a small flashlight in his mouth to operate entirely hands-free, marching straight up to the lens. He analyzed it, shielded it with a covered hand, grabbed some nearby plants to block the shot, and then forcefully yanked the whole unit off the house before bolting. He snagged the gear, knowing full well that local devices store footage. Honestly, he was smart to worry about that, but he seriously miscalculated by thinking stealing it erased the evidence. Federal agents spent roughly 10 days teaming up with Google techies to dig up hidden digital breadcrumbs. We're talking about tiny bits of code hanging around in the server clouds long after the hardware is destroyed or the clips are sent to the trash bin. George Mason University's cyber investigation head, Jim Jones, openly broke down exactly how this tech loophole works. Yanking a camera off the siding obviously halts new video, but anything caught beforehand usually floats in the company's servers temporarily until the system eventually wipes it for good. Federal agents discovered the contents held within that short-term memory cache. They managed to pull visual data off the gadget, which the perpetrator likely assumed was permanently erased. The retrieved video validated a pair of crucial details that would ultimately anchor the entire probe. Primarily, it provided a crystal-clear look at the individual standing on the veranda. It captured his stature, his physique, his gear, and his methodical pacing. Another major revelation was a separate batch of photos depicting a silhouette at that exact location, missing both the knapsack and the chest rig holster. Local county sheriff's deputies treaded lightly around this detail. Their public release clarified that these snapshots lacked any chronometric data, meaning any theories claiming the pictures originated from separate dates amounted to nothing more than guesswork. Authorities refused to verify any previous scouting trips. In fact, they actively disputed that specific theory. Former federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer presented an alternative theory. suggesting the silhouette lacking a rucksack in those pictures might actually be an entirely different individual, possibly a co-conspirator present at the residence during that exact evening, working alongside the main perpetrator but without hauling the same heavy gear. One undeniable fact is that detectives asked for video records from all residents within a 2-mile perimeter, stretching back to January 1st, an entire 4 weeks prior to the kidnapping. Casting such a massive net over such an extended time frame is highly unusual. It implies that law enforcement suspected somebody was prowling the subdivision well before the evening Nancy vanished. Her pacemaker data effectively capped the far end of that 41-minute time frame. At 2:12 in the morning, an additional security lens set up at the residence triggered a movement alert. It captured zero footage since the owner's plan lacked cloud storage, though it logged a solid chronological marker proving activity occurred right then and there. Shortly after, at 2:28 in the morning, the wireless link between Nancy's smart wearable and her mobile device disconnected. Wireless pairing typically spans around 30 feet. Once that digital tether snapped, Nancy was definitively further than 30 feet away from her handset. She was no longer indoors. She stepped outside. She was sitting in a getaway car. She was completely gone. Her body's final digital ping marked her exit from the premises at 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026. The medical gravity of that exact extraction timeline definitely deserves its own focused attention. Somnology expert Pat Byrne, while breaking down this exact scenario during an episode of Nancy Grace's true crime audio series, didn't mince words regarding the sheer danger of the situation. An 84-year-old female battling cardiovascular fragility with a built-in pacemaker, suddenly jolted out of a deep slumber around 2 in the morning by a home invader or a gang of crooks, faces documented cardiac risks entirely separate from any physical abuse they might suffer. Heavy sleeping inherently causes a major dip in regular cardiovascular regulation, violently snapping out of that deep resting phase due to sheer terror, profound confusion, forced bodily movement, and encountering hostile strangers generates proven cardiovascular strain, which practically guarantees severe medical emergencies in elderly victims. Byrne labeled the threat level as catastrophic, pointing directly to the deadly cocktail of the late hour: her advanced age, the pacemaker, and the jarring awakening. The attackers didn't even have to lay a finger on her for her system to plunge into physiological shock right at the onset of that 41-minute ordeal. Detectives similarly executed a sweep of the waste reservoir located in the backyard during the initial stages of their intelligence gathering. Pictures showed them hauling off the heavy access lid and prodding the subterranean basin using extended steel rods. Authorities kept completely quiet regarding what specifically triggered that particular backyard dig, though seasoned detectives weighing in on the matter pointed out that checking waste systems is textbook procedure during exhaustive forensic processing. It's normally done while cops methodically rule out every single possible hiding spot where crucial evidence or human remains could be stashed. The reservoir got inspected. Whether they uncovered something or came up completely empty-handed was kept tightly under wraps, failing to pivot the case toward any fresh trajectory. The absolute biggest scientific breakthroughs regarding this mystery certainly didn't surface during those initial 48 hours. Those findings surfaced after weeks of meticulous grinding, and the most crucial pieces still remain completely unsolved. Former federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer spotted a crucial detail that internet sleuths had mostly glossed over while she scrutinized the front porch video. Poking out from the perpetrator's coat pouch was a boxy gadget featuring a prominent signal rod sticking straight out. Coffindaffer's professional opinion, blasted across her online profiles and detailed during sit-downs with Newsweek, was incredibly precise. It was definitively a handheld walkie-talkie, not a Wi-Fi blocker, nor a smartphone, but a classic two-way radio. She bluntly argued that an actual scrambling device would have also wrecked the porch cam feed alongside Nancy's internal heart monitor link. Neither signal dropped offline until the bad guy manually yanked the lens down. The gadget served as a talking piece, and having a transceiver guarantees another individual is listening on the receiving end. The ex-agent's takeaway from this visual evidence was rock solid. The guy wasn't working solo and likely had a crew. She completely dismissed the idea of a lone wolf pulling off this kidnapping. The sheer logistics of blinding the security system, controlling the premises, and dragging an 84-year-old victim across a veranda into a getaway car absolutely demanded a multi-person crew. That handheld radio proved the figure on the stoop was actively chatting with an unseen partner who never stepped foot inside the camera's frame. Coffindaffer also highlighted how that gadget brilliantly explained a deeply frustrating dead end for detectives: geofencing. The digital dragnet cops deploy to flag every smart device pinging within a given radius at a certain hour had supposedly generated 0 actionable tips. The explanation for that failure, she insisted, was glaringly obvious in the video snippet. Two-way radios simply don't bounce off telecom masts. They create absolutely 0 electronic breadcrumbs. These culprits possess the tactical awareness to leave their cell phones behind. Within the residence, crime scene techs swabbed genetic material that clearly wasn't Nancy Guthrie's. Nor did it match anybody known to frequently visit her home. This specific biological trace is what the county sheriff publicly labeled as vastly more crucial than any clue discovered further away from the property, outweighing even those hand coverings scooped up 2 miles down the road. Way more important than the random objects dumped throughout the nearby wasteland. Investigators pulled genetic material directly from the indoor area occupied by an intruder over that 41-minute window. Unfortunately, the evidence turned out to be a tangled blend of profiles. Multiple people seem to have left behind biological traces in this sample. Unraveling blended genetic markers is a huge scientific headache. These sequences intertwine, meaning that isolating a single person's genetic signature demands heavy algorithmic processing that eats up massive amounts of time, often without yielding a pristine match for regular registry searches. The local sheriff openly admitted to this specific roadblock during press briefings. He pointed out how the blend likely held biological evidence from multiple individuals, giving the testing facility an absolute technical nightmare. Deciding exactly who should analyze this genetic evidence sparked massive drama and friction throughout the whole case, especially after federal agents pushed to ship the indoor biological traces and handwear straight to their Quantico facility. That Virginia location boasts some of the absolute best crime-solving technology on Earth, but Nanos said no, opting instead to mail everything to an independent Florida facility already partnered with Pima County for years. One government insider told Reuters this move actively threatened to stall a rapidly escalating investigation where every single second mattered. A federal informant chatting with NewsNation didn't hold back, flat-out labeling the choice idiotic and completely crazy. This source noted agents would probably need to reanalyze everything once they got it back from down south, wasting precious hours in an already tight timeline. That same insider mentioned prior slip-ups throughout the probe, hinting that out-of-state testing wasn't the sole reason things were dragging. Pima County supposedly dropped around $200,000 shipping materials out to that southern facility. The sheriff stood his ground, claiming he just needed every piece of physical proof kept together. Consolidating the relatives' known genetic signatures alongside the new evidence meant analysts could seamlessly compare every single biological clue together. He aggressively pushed back against rumors that he was freezing out federal agents, slamming those articles as total garbage and entirely fake. He insisted the federal guys completely understood his logic after a quick chat. Yet leaks from government insiders painted a completely different picture of the Bureau's actual stance. Everything the crimson droplets, the handwear genetics, and the indoor biological traces sat waiting down in Florida. Federal authorities verified they'd be using investigative genetic genealogy on the biological material found indoors. This specific genealogical approach is what finally unmasked Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer back in 2018, closing a frustrating 4-decade chapter where crime scene evidence never triggered a single registry hit. The strategy thrives because the actual perpetrator doesn't even have to be listed in criminal systems. Investigators just need a family member, somebody sharing adequate biological ties to highlight a shared bloodline on an open-source ancestry site. Expert ancestry analysts take that fractional match to map out entire lineages, filtering the pool by location, birth year, and appearance traits until one distinct target emerges. That's how a 72-year-old DeAngelo got cuffed at his own house in 2018. He's currently locked away forever. Now, detectives are using that exact playbook on the genetic traces left behind inside Nancy Guthrie's residence, actively hunting for leads. Officials haven't publicly admitted whether that controversial shipping detour genuinely sabotaged the investigation's critical momentum or not. Yet the Bureau firmly maintained that utilizing their advanced national resources was the quickest route to truth, and avoiding that just extended the Guthrie family's agonizing nightmare. Simultaneously, handwear discovered scattered around the block opened a uniquely puzzling new chapter. Roughly 2 miles away, searchers spotted dark handwear that looked exactly like the ones the perpetrator rocked in that eerie porch camera video. Lab techs pulled biological material and ran it through CODIS, a registry packing over 26 million criminal entries. Nothing hit. Eventually, detectives linked those traces back to a nearby fast food worker who had absolutely zero involvement in the crime, immediately killing that theory. Then, 2 locals stumbled upon crimson-soaked handwear and a bloody stone roughly 1 mile out. But initial tests proved those drops didn't align with the traces found indoors. Cops kept finding more hand coverings scattered farther out, even up to 10 miles down the road, which were immediately sent off for analysis. Seeing this weird path of ditched clothing led a former federal investigator to point out a disturbing logic if the attacker tossed gear while fleeing. Detectives urgently needed to figure out what else got dumped during their getaway and where that crucial hidden evidence was currently laying around. About 21 days deep into the search, journalist Michael Ruiz from Fox News spotted a busted electrical panel right near the Guthrie residence, sparking intense public speculation. Local authorities verified they were checking out the equipment. That clue actually synced up perfectly with details both federal and county agents were already piecing together while knocking on neighbors' doors, deliberately questioning the locals about any weird Wi-Fi dropouts during the early hours of February 1st. A guy living nearby mentioned to News Nation's Brian Enton that his security lens, specifically the unit pointing toward the victim's house, suddenly displayed an offline error right in the middle of the night. The rest of his home surveillance setup worked perfectly fine, and he'd literally never encountered that glitch before. Federal agents started digging into a potential deliberate network blackout perfectly timed to coincide with the kidnapping. The idea of a wireless network blocker was brought up by Coffindaffer and her peers. Yet, her own rebuttal effectively dismantled that very hypothesis. Had a signal blocker been successful, NY's heart device link and the security feed would have dropped out prior to the lens being manually detached. Neither actually occurred. Authorities have yet to openly verify or dismiss any particular tactic deployed to knock out the area's electronic surveillance during that evening. Detectives are still examining the electrical panel, roughly 2.5 miles away. Doorbell footage recorded an unknown car around 2:36 on the morning of February 1st, roughly 8 minutes after NY's heart device shut down. Federal agents stated they were looking into the car. Based on the latest official briefing, its exact make remains unknown. The Bureau shifted visual review teams to Phoenix expressly to manage the massive amount of security recordings pulled from the vicinity. They had to sort through several 100,000 cars. Catching a tag yields a title holder, and that title holder turns into a suspect. Whenever outside experts evaluate the details of this situation, several individuals boasting deep backgrounds in national policing have scrutinized the facts quite thoroughly. Specific details clash awkwardly. While they fail to indicate one clear path, they pile up enough to spark doubts that official statements haven't completely resolved. The primary issue stems from events taking place prior to federal agents getting entirely involved in the search. On February 2nd, 24 hours after Nancy vanished, Sheriff Nanos informed NBC News she was kidnapped straight out of her bedroom. 24 hours later, he retracted those comments, admitting there was zero proof backing up his assertions. He possessed no idea if she was snatched while sleeping. He was completely unaware whether she was snoozing at the exact moment the intruder initially approached her. These remarks went out live to viewers nationwide throughout the crucial initial phase of the manhunt, and they simply weren't true. During that identical initial time frame, the house was unsealed. Rather than waiting a few days or letting the Bureau run a thorough forensic pass, the premises were opened up prior to national detectives getting complete entry. Journalists stood right by the entryway. You could clearly spot the gore, an essential evidentiary space. The absolute core zone holding vital clues about the kidnapping became accessible to outsiders long before officials verified it was fully processed. which Nanos admitted was a blunder. Fellow officers inside his own agency echoed that sentiment. Several former detectives publicly agreed. Then came the routing choice. Genetic material pulled from the residence, clues the sheriff personally labeled as paramount to solving this mystery, got shipped to an independent Florida lab instead of the federal testing center in Quantico, something the federal agency explicitly requested. Bureau agents had to deal with that Florida facility just to get their materials back, and insiders claimed they'd probably need to run the swabs again upon retrieval. Given everyone knew the clock was ticking, since Nancy Guthrie was 84 and missing her heart pills, that call tacked on extra hurdles to the absolute most urgent scientific procedure in the whole inquiry. The sheriff's reasoning stayed steady. He preferred keeping every clue centralized, ensuring all available genetic maps and identifiers stayed grouped for accurate comparison. While that rationale makes sense superficially, the Bureau countered according to various insiders by insisting their national assets and advanced testing facilities offered the quickest route to naming a culprit. Both perspectives are well documented. High-ranking authorities openly characterized the friction between these two approaches as a massive roadblock. Another inconsistency surfaced in the press regarding how the sheriff portrayed the current progress of the hunt. While speaking to NBC Nightly News toward the end of February, the chief stated detectives weren't pursuing fresh suspects. Yet simultaneously, several Tucson storefronts mentioned that federal agents had presented them with rosters and photos connected to the search. The local boss was spinning one narrative. The Bureau's actual boots-on-the-ground actions seemed to tell a completely different story. Detectives assigned to the manhunt back then allegedly felt confused over who held real authority: local brass or federal agents. Meanwhile, the United Cajun Navy, an unpaid rescue group famous for assisting with high-profile disappearances nationwide, extended a comprehensive support package to him, packing tracking hounds and high-tech aerial cameras to scour the rough landscape surrounding the Catalina foothills. Per the charity's second-in-command, who discussed the matter openly, the sheriff totally ignored them. A lawman claiming to the media that things were progressing smoothly completely ignored a massive donation of tracking resources from a highly successful rescue outfit. The chief blamed potential evidence corruption as his excuse for turning away external tracking assistance. Backlash from certain groups was sharp, noting the actual house was already open to journalists on day one anyway. The tainted evidence excuse carried a pretty complicated past. The $1.3 million legal claim brought against the chief and the Pima County authorities originated from a prisoner locked up locally named Christopher Michael Marks. Officials never really gave the public any real details about that lawsuit. Plus, hitting a sheriff with a lawsuit right in the middle of a massive ongoing case happens all the time. However, the surrounding circumstances making up the big picture are definitely out of the ordinary. Almost 98% of his staff supposedly backed a vote of no confidence, while another officer openly claimed he made the whole search about his own ego. There was also an argument over accessing evidence with the FBI, something both parties freely admitted. Then you have a sheriff stating openly during a media briefing that dealing with the intense spotlight of such a massive situation felt entirely foreign to him. Even with his years on the force, these things are not illegal, nor is there any solid proof that they actually sabotaged the search efforts. Still, if you want to figure out exactly why the search has produced so little over 40 days, every single choice made since the evening Nancy vanished directly shaped our current situation. Furthermore, those choices came with a hefty price tag: losing precious hours, missing out on physical clues, or damaging the mutual trust between departments that rescue teams had to navigate. Exactly 2 days following Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, KOL News got the initial ransom message. Channel 13 out in Tucson via their digital tip line, followed by another to that exact station, and eventually one hitting TMZ. Once detectives finally organized every message, they realized that variations of a nearly identical letter landed at a minimum of 3 distinct news outlets. The sender wanted millions of dollars paid out in Bitcoin alongside 2 strict deadlines, claiming Nancy remained unharmed, although terrified, while stating clearly that they would only speak in one direction and cease talking altogether once the demands were laid out. Furthermore, the letter made it crystal clear that reaching back out was impossible. Her relatives just needed to sit tight. Shutting down any chance for a two-way conversation right from the start is an incredibly strategic move. An anxious, reckless person does not operate like that. This shows a mastermind anticipating exactly how detectives might try tracking them down. The lead FBI agent running the Phoenix branch, Hythe Janicki, openly verified that the letter contained a couple of highly specific facts completely unknown to the general public back then. Number 1 involved Nancy's Apple Watch, pointing out exactly where it sat indoors. Number 2 mentioned an outdoor security light on the grounds that the writer claimed was smashed or non-functional. Aerial video from Fox News eventually showed a pair of shattered spotlights hanging by their cables out back, entirely hidden from the street and completely absent from previous press reports. According to federal agents, knowing precisely where that smartwatch lay inside the residence was impossible to glean from watching the news. Police contacts noted that these two pieces of insider knowledge convinced the team that the threat was totally real, proving the author genuinely knew the exact layout and contents of the residence. Harvey Levan over at TMZ checked out a copy himself, calling the writing incredibly meticulous, structurally sound, flawlessly punctuated, and deeply complex. He mentioned that pinpointing the smartwatch was exactly the sort of clue that, if true, would instantly grab the Bureau's full attention. Mary Coleman, the KD anchor who caught the initial message, stated it held secrets that only Nancy's actual kidnapper could possess. Specific facts that only someone standing right there during the abduction could possibly understand. Derek Culla, a 42-year-old resident of Hawthorne, California, ended up in handcuffs on February 5, 2026, over a completely distinct and unconnected message. Culla bypassed the press entirely, texting Annie Guthrie and her husband Tomaso Chioni directly for Bitcoin while masking his tracks with a VIP number. Federal authorities managed to track that line using public online tools back to Culla's personal Google email, proving he texted them right from his house in Los Angeles. Prosecutors hit him with charges for sending an extortion threat across state borders and utilizing electronics to intimidate people. The Bureau made it abundantly clear that his texts were a fake extortion attempt, totally separate from those initial letters sent to reporters. Culla played absolutely no role in the actual kidnapping. Authorities stressed that fact heavily. However, busting him meant detectives now had to meticulously authenticate every single future message before even thinking about replying. This threw a massive wrench into a delicate bargaining situation that was already racing against the clock. That specific letter mentioning the smartwatch laid out a pair of strict time limits. The initial cutoff hit at 5 p.m. Thursday, February 5th. A second, heavier deadline landed Monday, February 9th, bumping the price up to $6 million. Relatives went on television stating they would gladly hand over the cash, working alongside federal mediators. Savannah Guthrie recorded a clip speaking straight to her mother's captor. Cameron Guthrie also released a personal plea just as the initial cutoff approached. Eventually, the $6 million expiration date came and went. Even though the cash was sitting right there, yet the person behind those messages, the one holding secret details about a busted patio light and exactly where Nancy Guthrie left her smartwatch, vanished completely. They offered zero evidence she was alive, gave zero next steps, and completely ignored the family's desperate pleas. The sudden radio silence was absolutely deafening. Even Nanos admitted openly while talking to the Daily Mail that figuring out the true motive behind the whole ordeal completely stumped him. He publicly questioned if the extortion attempt was actually real or merely a smokescreen. He wondered if cold cash was the true motive or a deep private grudge. Putting it bluntly, he posed the question himself: was this actually a cash grab or pure payback for a past grievance? Posed directly to the press by the lead investigator on the case. That specific inquiry remains completely unresolved in the public eye, yet it highlights the exact same bizarre reality as the quiet following the payment cutoff. Those letters contained deeply guarded secrets no outsider could possibly possess. That time limit expired with zero communication, completely contradicting how a typical extortionist planning to trade Nancy for cash would normally behave. Regardless of the actual motive behind this abduction, the known facts simply refuse to align with your standard run-of-the-mill hostage situation. That glaring contradiction, a flawlessly executed abduction followed by absolute radio silence regarding payment, stands as a massive lingering mystery hanging over the whole probe. Glancing closely at the gathered clues makes one thing abundantly clear to any observer. This attack was anything but a crime of opportunity. Gripping a small flashlight in his mouth to free up hands for methodically disabling the security lens proved he was incredibly well practiced or exhaustively trained. That two-way radio tucked away proved an accomplice was actively listening, receiving an extortion letter 48 hours after the fact, which perfectly detailed where an Apple Watch sat indoors and mentioned a busted backyard security beam. Confirmed the culprits possessed intimate familiarity with the home. You cannot gather that kind of intimate detail by merely driving past the property. 3 separate crime scene experts evaluated the red stains on the steps, concluding the victim was dragged away rather than leaving on foot. That 41-minute time frame, perfectly sandwiched between a security lens shutting off and a heart device losing connection, painted a picture of a highly calculated, ruthlessly executed, and swiftly finished operation. Whoever wore that specific coat has now been viewed by a larger audience than practically any suspect tied to a modern stateside disappearance. That surveillance clip went totally viral. Stills are plastered across all mainstream media networks and dominating feeds throughout the entirety of the English-speaking internet. This intruder stepped onto those front boards as his true self, wearing his real face obscured by a disguise, sure yet directly facing a sensor that perfectly recorded his stature, his physical frame, his unique gait, the gear he packed, and his chillingly methodical composure. A friend or relative has absolutely laid eyes on that viral clip, an acquaintance capable of identifying that coat, those pale trousers, or his highly distinct posture lingering in an entryway has undoubtedly watched it as well. Coffindaffer laid it out perfectly. The absolute best shot at cracking this mystery requires a personal connection finally stepping up. That isn't to say the crime lab won't figure it out eventually. They almost certainly will. Rather, the absolute quickest shortcut from our current gridlock to slapping cuffs on someone involves human intuition, not a microscope. It all hinges on a difficult dialogue that hasn't happened yet, a crucial phone clue waiting to be dialed in, a tough choice facing a bystander who has been secretly hoarding the truth all along. Out there in America, an individual fully understands every detail of those 41 minutes. They know who monitored the radio frequency and who steered the getaway car, caught by a doorbell lens at 2:36 in the morning, a couple of miles down the road, acting as a lookout while an intruder approached an 84-year-old grandmother's entryway, flashlight clenched in their jaw, executing a sinister plot they had previously scouted the grounds to perfect. Hotlines remain fully active. Contact federal agents directly at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Submit web leads to tips.fbi.gov. Puma County Sheriff's 520-351-490. Every lead stays completely confidential. The bounty for details securing NY's safe return or bringing the perpetrators to justice currently exceeds $1.2 million. If this mystery has you hooked, and you demand to be present when the truth drops, when cuffs click, when that disguise falls, and when the complete narrative regarding that February 1st dawn in the Catalina foothills finally breaks open, hit subscribe and toggle those alerts. This investigation remains fully active. The narrative hasn't ended. Behind every cold statistic is a warm memory being torn apart. Nancy Guthrie wasn't just a target in the Tucson night. She was a mother whose life depended on a handful of pills and the sacred bond of family. At 84, her home should have been a sanctuary, not a hunting ground. This tragedy teaches us a chilling, vital lesson. Safety is a collective responsibility, not a guarantee. In our fast-paced world, we often forget the silent vulnerability of our elders, those whose heartbeats are measured by pacemakers and whose security relies on the watchful eyes of neighbors. When Nancy's digital lifeline snapped at 2, it wasn't just a technical failure. It was a call to action for every one of us. We must be our brother's keeper and our grandmother's shield. The truth about those missing 41 minutes doesn't just live in a forensic lab. It lives in the conscience of someone listening. Let this be a reminder to cherish every card game, every supper, and to never ignore the shadows in our streets. Justice isn't just about handcuffs. It's about the courage to speak when the world goes quiet. Until Nancy comes home, a piece of our collective heart remains missing.